Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. This is Mike Steckline, partner for the Institute for Enterprise Excellence, with a presentation today from a person that I just met a couple days ago via Zoom, which is happening a lot these days, people connecting by Zoom. And so as I was chatting with him, we had a really great conversation, and I asked him if he would be interested in presenting, and he agreed to do that. So I'm very pleased that that happened. On the slide that you see here, this is kind of a continuing conversation around topics around complexity. So I've got the bit.ly links to some previous webinars that are there, and then you see the bit.ly link to the announcement for today's presentation that Mohamed Saleh is going to provide for us. So just a bit of information here. In this time of the coping with this pandemic, I've introduced some resources that I found beneficial and just want to offer them up to folks. So I found a podcast by Al Franken that you can find at that bit.ly link to be helpful there. He talks about the mental health and justice. And then Dr. Laurie Santos from Yale University has a nice podcast that she has on the Happiness Lab. And I found that one that you can find at that bit.ly link, the most recent one, to be particularly helpful. And then on the final bit.ly link, Gaping Void, if you're familiar with their illustrations, one of their illustrations is shown on the right-hand side. They're offering a ebook that's free, and that's that bit.ly link takes you to the second part of that bit.ly link that you can take advantage of. And so we'll be able to, people can get that as they would like to. And so as I've offered in the past, if anyone wants to hang around after the webinar is done, I'm happy to do so. If anyone wants to just to chat and understand how people are coping with this situation. But I hope everyone's staying safe, staying well, and really grateful for the opportunity to learn from Mohamed today. A little bit of housekeeping. I've got the phones muted, and if you have a chance and you want to mute the background noise that you've got in the background, you can do that on your end as well, just as a safeguard. This webinar is being recorded so that you can take advantage of the recording later on and pass it on to others that you will find to be beneficial. We will have some time to unmute the phones later to do some Q&A, so we'll be able to handle that as well. Just a quick overview, some things that I talked about in the March webinar, and this was happening before a lot of this pandemic activity was occurring. So in the March webinar, I was unpacking a lot of the things that I've been learning about managing through complexity. And so you can see some of the topics there. I'm not going to go through each of those topics, but I did unpack a bit of things that I know Mohamed's going to touch upon today and some of the references that I have used on that. At the April 3rd webinar, some things I talked about, and we reflected a little bit upon using the Sensemaking Framework to understand how did we get into this situation, how did we get tossed into chaos, and how are we trying to work our way out of it. And one of the things I wanted to bring out is a framework that Dave Snowden introduced, talking about three processes that are in play. Do I see the data? Do I pay attention to the data? Do I attend to the data? Are three different things. And we can reflect on how we got into this situation. I think there was data that was present, but the thing I pondered about is did people actually see the data? Did they attend to the data? And did they act on the data? So I talked a bit about that on April 3rd. There's a nice podcast webinar that Chris Corrigan has, and he talked a little bit about some of the reflections on using the Sensemaking framework to think about movement and coping within the coronavirus situation. So I talked about that. Talked about inattentional blindness and referred to the work of the people that wrote the book, The Invisible Gorilla, and the importance of understanding this concept of inattentional blindness in human beings. Talked about the problem with confusing correlation with causation. And building upon that, discussed the caution of using a case-based approach to try to form strategies and movement forward, and talked about 3 effects, the Cobra effect, the Hawthorne effect, and the butterfly effect. And today's webinar is not, the purpose isn't to get into those. I'm just pointing out some things that were talked about in the April 3rd webinar. Chatted briefly about the importance of the difference between people that can follow recipes and those that become chefs, and how we have to really attend to the time and effort that it takes to build knowledge, and really understanding the importance of building generalists that can see the connections between concepts and the ability to go beyond merely following recipes. Talk briefly about the problem with trying to change people, whether you're using some sort of a competency approach and trying to claim that everyone should have certain competencies, and if they just had those competencies, things would work well. And so I spent a bit of time on that. And then the final topic I tried to talk about was the importance of lessons, and when we reflect on lessons, if we're successful, we tell one story. If we're unsuccessful, we seem to tell another story. And talk briefly about the importance of real-time lessons learning, data capture to capture lessons as we go. Also talked about the notion that people learn more from lessons of failure as opposed to lessons of success. So just some topics we talked about last time. The bit.ly link at the top can take you to the web recording from the April 3rd webinar. So what I'd like to do now is turn it over to Dr. Mohamed Saleh, who's going to take us through a deeper understanding of some of the things that I did not yet talk on, but I'm very interested in to learn from him today. So Mohamed, you've got the controls.
Excellent. Well, good morning, everyone. Today I'm going, and thank you, Mike, for kind of the overview. I was actually taking notes as you were speaking, and I'm going to have to go back and try to gather some of the wisdom from the April 3rd one, because it sounds like it was very rich with stuff. So looking forward to that. So today we're going to talk about real-time sensemaking, and there's a lot that we're going to be covering in that. So the purpose of today is to kind of do an overview, and the area that I'm going to dive a little bit deeper in is going to be around real-time sensemaking. So first of all, a little bit about me. I'm from Connecticut. It's that small state in between New York and Massachusetts. I have 2 daughters. One is 8 and one is 4, Aya and Noura. And I'm very blessed to have a wife that could tolerate me through these times. Being home alone this much has been an interesting journey for all of us. With that said, my background, the past 12 years, I've been in primarily serving healthcare organizations, kind of doing a quick snapshot. Spent 5 years in the medical group in a director role, serving them around approximately 60 primary care offices, and then moved into an acute hospital setting where I led the transformation there. And then 4 years after that, did a full-wide lean transformation for a large healthcare system of 30,000 employees plus, and had approximately around 30 practitioners that reported to me in the lean office at that time. So primarily, most of my career has been in healthcare. Prior to healthcare, I was in aerospace. I started off multifaceted. Really, I had an opportunity around 11 years ago to start a company with an individual named Dave Stack. Started a lean consulting company called Visibility, and most recently have launched a very thrilling and exciting venture with a group of very smart individuals with an organization called M+, really focused on serving the community in the time of need, and making sure that we are able to share wisdom and be able to serve them in a timely fashion. So those are my 2 organizations that I currently am partners in. I also teach at Elms College in Massachusetts, and I've been teaching for the last 11 years at Central Connecticut State University. primarily in the graduate schools. And my doctorate is in business administration, but I started off as a mechanical engineer. So my undergrad was mechanical engineering, and have a master's in technology management. So that's a little bit about my academic and professional side. So I'm just going to jump in now to the actual topics of the day. I'm going to go through three pieces really of the agenda. The first piece, we're going to talk about exaptation and how this is a critical time to consider that as we go into understanding what this new world looks like. How do we apply real-time sense-making to this and be able to gather data and awareness of the data that we're gathering. And from that, we're going to go into distributed leadership and talk about how we could work remotely around this. First, I want to start with this term called Bucha. Many of you are familiar with this term at a time of complexity right now, and with so much uncertainty, this speaks volumes and is very loud and clear. Volatility, as we go through this, is really going to focus on the rate of change that we're all being forced into doing. If we like it or not, it's happening, it's occurring, and the uncertainty is really looking at how unclear the present is for many of us, and complexity, Mike talked about it, and is really going to be focused on, and how in this time of rapid change, the multiple decision makings that we have to do. And ambiguity really calls for the lack of clarity, the fog that we're going through and sailing through with the uncertainty of what comes to it. So my personal perspective is volatility, uncertainty, and ambiguity causes complexity. However, all four of them right now kind of summarize the world that we live in. So that's, if you hear me use the word Bucha, just to level set, that's what that stands for. With that, I'm going to go into an article that Adrian posted last month and through the International Journal of Energy Research. And I was very, I want to say, fascinated by this journal, and you could see the link below and look it up to read more further into it. However, the time to act, and we're seeing it across the globe right now, is that there's a lot of parallelization that's happening with a lot of the continuous improvement efforts that are occurring. And in my opinion, this is actually the time to do more continuous improvement rather than to kind of pause and wait until this is over. There's, we're in a threat right now, and with any immediate threat, the definition of threat is that it's immediate, but hopefully it's not disabling. And so how do we get out of that disabling? And I think Adrian really pointed out that there's this S curve that was articulated in the research, and there is this inflection point right on top here of the top of the S, and many organizations, this is the area where they're reaping a lot of progress, a lot of profit, and their product is producing the things that it needs to be produced. However, it starts to go under that norm, goes under that line, and you start regressing. And what Adrian pointed out is that at that inflection point right here, we need to think of how could we kind of springboard back into a new S curve. And this is the time that we're in right now. And there's many ways that we could springboard at that point. So right now, if you're in an organization, being healthcare, manufacturing, service sector, whatever industry you're in, food and nutrition, there's an opportunity to springboard rather than we're seeing a lot of conversations about downsizing organizations. Rather than go down that path, there's a way that we could strengthen ourselves and actually springboard into something better. So I'm going to talk about those inflection points. So there's in my mind, two ways to springboard from that inflection point. David Snowden points out in multiple different forums that exaptation is more needed today than any other day. And the definition of exaptation is really just the repurposing of certain capabilities that you already have in your organization. And we're seeing it everywhere. We're seeing distilleries quickly exact into making hand sanitization. We're seeing car manufacturing making equipments for ventilators and equipment for healthcare organizations that are needed today. We're seeing the textile industries, start making masks and converting to the need that's required today. These are all exaptation type examples of capabilities that they already had, and they just repurposed it to serve the current need. Now, as we look at this, that is at that inflection point, rather than readjust all your skills and look for new skills, what this is affording you is to be able to look at your current capability, look at the current market needs, and understand, okay, what is the current market needs that my current capabilities could fulfill. And so these are just 3 examples in a distillery and manufacturing and textile, but there's so many that are happening around the globe right now of organizations doing really an amazing job exapting into and repurposing their current capabilities to serve the current needs. So that's one way of addressing that inflection point. The other area is using a blue ocean strategy and looking at what you're currently doing, which everyone else is probably doing as well, and look at what are the kind of I won't use the word spin-offs, but the tentacles that are complementary to your current organization that you could start serving. So in a blue ocean strategy, you could start looking, okay, well, maybe if I'm in the restaurant business, what are other things that outside now my shop is closed, people can't come visit me. What are the other things that I could look from a blue ocean strategy standpoint to serve? Can I deliver to their house? Is that a market that no one has explored yet? Can I do prepackaged meals for certain communities? Can I look at innovative ways to create innovative ideas which are going to require new capabilities, but are an extension of my current industry or my current offerings? The goal in this blue ocean strategy is to explore areas that that other people are not exploring yet. So if you're in an organization that's looking, for doing training, and now everyone's going online, by you just going online, you'll be no different than the other. What is the opportunity for you to go online and serve the others that maybe no one else has considered yet? So these are 2 really good approaches to springboard from that inflection point, rather than look at layoffs and downsizing your organization. This is really critical because I'm getting a lot of phone calls by a lot of executives from organizations that are talking about downsizing when the goal is, okay, have we explored the alternative methods of exaptation and blue ocean strategies? And let's look at that, because that might actually save a lot of people's jobs and actually could help the organization grow in areas that now they're being forced to, because now the threat is immediate, but it can't be disabling. If it's disabling, you're going to just shrink and close shop. If it's not disabling, using one of these 2 strategies, it'll really propel you forward. So as we're talking about, okay, so there's a lot of things happening. We talked about exaptation, we talked about blue ocean strategy, we talked about that inflection point. How do we understand the data that we're gathering to understand the domains that we're working with? And if this conniving framework by David Snowden, and I was first introduced to it by Nigel Thurlow at the Flow System workshop, and it really goes into how do we go from a linear approach to a nonlinear side where there's chaos and complexity. Complexity thinking is really where we're in right now. This framework speaks very, very loud to me, and Mike had talked about it earlier in the April 3rd webinar as well as the intro today. So I'm not going to go into too much into it, but understanding that this area of ambiguity, this area of confusion, disorder, how do we understand which domain things that we have go into, and how do they overlay with one another? This means that we have to understand the data that we're gathering. In this case, data precedes framework. And so if the data is going to precede the framework, I need to then understand the data that I'm getting, and is that data truthful, or is it the truth? And there's a big I distinguish the two significantly, because truthfulness is often data that I gather that supports my current bias. It's truthful for me because I believe in something, someone said it, it validates my belief, and so it feels truthful. That's very different than the truth. The truth could be against my personal belief. And so how do we understand the truth? Because we don't want to be exacting, or we don't want to be going down and doing blue ocean strategies in a direction that is different than the truth of what's going on. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that truth. So to understand the truth and understand how we have to pivot at that inflection point, we need to understand the concept of weak signal detection. Now, knowing weak signal detection is a critical aspect. And if you're in a place where you're opening your pantry and you have nothing there, it's too late at that point. You've already pretty much missed all the signals. So what we're going to be talking about right now is how could you be proactive of all the new information that you're gathering and responsively pivot. So I'm going to talk about 7 real-time sense-makings that will allow you to parse signal from noise. This is a critical topic because as we explore the area of complexity, we're going to also be exploring the area of innovation. And that could be in the exaptation mindset, or it could be in the blue ocean strategy. In both cases, we need to be able to parse signal from noise. Now, how do we understand signal? Even if it's a weak signal, we have to look at each one of these domains. So I'm going to go through each one. There's a social domain, a source domain, a retrospect domain, a cues domain, impressions, plausibility, enactment. Each one has a level of information that we gather from it. Some are just noise based on biases, and some are actual signals. And if we're able to tailor and weave all these weak signals from each one of these domains, we are able to see the truth. And from that, we could act on that inflection point and understand which one of the two strategies we're going to adopt. So let's talk about each one. So the first one is the social one. Now that tends to be the more popular one, one that we see a lot, and the social one is really focused on your social structures. So what is your family saying? What is your friends saying? What are your coworkers saying? All that could enable you to make get a clear picture, or what seems to be like a clear picture of what's going on. And so if your friends are saying something, and your family is saying the same thing, and people at work are saying the same thing, then you might think that's true. That doesn't make it true. It makes that there's alignment in a lot of them, and based on all that data that came in, some are going to be aligned with one another, some are not going to be aligned with one another. Some people might be really angry that they're staying at home, while others are going to be talking about how important social distancing is, or physical distancing, I like to call. And so understanding the significance of that amount of information that you're getting from your social structures is information. Now, I would say let's just assume 100%, not 100, let's assume the majority of it is noise. What we're going to try to do as we go through each one of these boxes is to understand and tailor what are the repetitive pieces of information that seems to be valid from each one of the domains, and make a picture of it. So let's just put all the information we gather from social into that bucket before we make an informed decision of what truth looks like. We could then move into source. Now, source, I'm a researcher by trade. Everything I do has to be validated by something. And so source is, let me go look at the publications that are being published by credible individuals, credible organizations, credible research bases. What are all the articles that are coming out that that inform the current condition that we're in? And so looking at all these different sources, understanding, what are the credible individuals out there that have a certain level of information saying about this. These are more journals and articles and more peer-reviewed articles and research findings of different individuals that are conducting research and looking at this research and saying, okay, this is a valid source. Now, you would think it's a valid source, but in my time in the research field, I'm going to tell you, it's as disappointing as it sounds, sometimes that's a little jaded. Sometimes, if you're a pharmaceutical company wanting to prove something and you're the one funding a certain research, it might be biased to a pharmaceutical lens rather than it being just completely unbiased. And so sourcing actually has a significant amount of noise in itself. Even though it's credible, it doesn't make it truth because it's still tainted or jaded by different individuals that are funding that research. However, it's still a source of information, probably one of my favorite sources of information, but that doesn't make it true. So we take all that information that we gathered from sourcing, we overlay it on social and see, is there a pattern starting to emerge? We don't stop there. We move on to the third box. Now, the third box is looking at things in retrospect. Okay, what are some relevant past experiences? What are they telling us? What has worked for us in the past? So when we had the swine flu, what did we do? How did we act upon that? How long did it last? How did we eliminate it? How did it go away? Starting to look, and I just used the swine flu as an example. There's millions of examples that we could give. But when that came out, it pretty much got eradicated. And okay, so what could we learn retrospectively from that experience and compare it to what we're doing today? That will give us a lens that is very significant and very different than social and source. And that will allow us to start painting a picture of what could look like the truth. I would say, for me at least, in a retrospect, this is a source of information that is vital. It helps us understand from our failures and our lessons learned. History's repeats itself if we don't learn from it. And there's a lot of things that it just keeps repeating. And for me, that's a good example of how we have not seen the signals that allow us to proactively pivot and respond before the crisis happens. And so it just repeats itself again. So if proactively we're able to understand weak signal detection, proactively looking in retrospect of what are the things that happen that are telling us that if the following things happen, if you do this, then it'll stop it. If we don't do it, it'll just come back again. That for me is a significant level of vital information. So I would say between social, source, and retrospect, that's a good body of work that allows us to parse signal from noise. Now, if we stop there, we might be able to understand the truth to some degree. However, we want to get a little bit further because we want to get out of our own bias, because it might feel truthful at this point, but it's not still the truth. And for us to understand those signals, there's only a very limited amount that's true signal. And so the next domain is what we call the cue. Now, cues are those signs that we see ahead that tell you kind of like, merge or yield into this lane because it's going to close, and if we choose not to, we're going to be stuck in a conundrum. And so those are the things that we could proactively tell us where we need to go, and the current environment helps point us to certain forks in the road. If we do this, then down the line we're going to see this. You see a lot of field hospitals being open right now with the projection that the infection of the coronavirus is going to continue increasing, compound. And so they're proactively setting up field hospitals to be able to combat that. Those are cues. We're seeing a certain trend, we're understanding the information, and based on that, we're making a decision to open up additional field hospitals using convention centers, using universities, using a lot of different areas, so that as this virus spreads, we are proactively prepared. That's an example of us reacting to a cue, seeing a certain trend and just going ahead and taking that information and proactively setting that up. Now, that could be true. We could have this epidemic that increases and we end up using the field hospitals. I'm from Connecticut, so I could tell you that the proportion of increase that we have been expecting is not increasing at that rate. That doesn't mean it's not going to increase suddenly, but there's some forecasting that we did that doesn't make it true. However, it's a projection. It's a set of information that it's telling us, hey, if we don't set up these field hospitals, we're going to run into a crisis. Hey, if we allow people to leave their houses, it's going to spread further. These are all cues, forks in the road, that we as individuals have to make decisions on. Now, we could agree with those decisions, we could disagree with those decisions. That's not the point of this conversation. The point of this conversation is that it's a set of data that we get. People are saying this will happen. And so that's a cue for us. So if we match that cue with retrospect occurrences, with some sources that we're getting, with social conversation, we're able to tailor something of significance. And we start seeing true over truthfulness. We start seeing true over noise. And those are weak signal detections. Each one has a weak signal detection that points us to proactively do something. I'm going to say personally in my career, those four have served me well. However, there are 3 other domains that I think are worth exploring that allow us to actually be able to see the weak signals. So the next one is what I call, the 5th one is what I call impressions. Now, a lot of different books, David, I never get his last name correctly. Schmetschittingberger, I think is how you pronounce it. But Daniel talks about impressions a lot, and it's really critical that you observe with an eye to see what's going on in people's reaction. You know, we could be talking about someone or talking about, not someone, we could be talking with someone, and we could see through their impressions how they truly feel. So, you know, you might see a nurse at the hospital says, you know, we're fighting this epidemic, we're steady, strong. But as you watch her body language or his body language, you might see a heightened level of anxiety, a heightened level of fear of what's going on, which makes you doubt, is what he or she's saying true? Or is it reassuring for others to stay positive? And so because they might have a set of information that if they disclose to the public, it could cause more anxiety. So they're doing a social service by reassuring the community. However, that information that's coming out might not be the truth. So looking at looking at it with a deep level of emotional awareness. If any of you had recently listened to any of the workings of Ravi Rowe, he talks, him and Sonia Singh really talk deeply around the concept of emotional awareness at this time, and looking at body language and looking at impressions and understanding as these individuals, are talking. Are you able to parse out some of the true signals that says, you know what, this person has a lot of anxiety. I think they're just reassuring me. And so impressions become really important. Body language, tone of voice, all that really help us understand the data that we're getting from different individuals. Now that is kind of combined with social and other sources that I'm going to talk, or other domains that I'm going to talk about. But in this one, you're more looking at body language, you're looking at tone, you're looking at impressions. Those impressions have data within them. And if you're able to parse some of that data out and match it with the other venues that we talked about, you'll be able to get a clearer sense and validate some of the things that are now coming to be a conclusion for you that that's the truth. At that point, you've gathered a set of information, you have a lot of data that is in front of you. You're at a point where you can make sense of the data and what it's telling you, and understand which domain. Is it complex? Are we in chaotic? What are we going to do about it? And how to react at that inflection point? The last two are the most popular, and I left them till the end because I personally try to leave them to the end, because if I lead with them, they jade my thinking. Not to to say anything bad about them, but they could be very jading. And so the sixth one is plausibility. And plausibility is a very popular source of information. There's a lot of signals that are hidden within it. There's always different sides talking about the exact same thing, and it's the propaganda of the news and the stories that we're hearing on social medias and social platforms. And it's really all the news that we're getting that speak to different sides. Some people might say, on the news that, we're overreacting to this. This is really nothing. Look how many other deaths have occurred from other things, and this one is nothing compared to them. Where some, this is causing a collapse in our economics and as a country. And while others are saying, if we don't address this, it's going to be catastrophic. That's news. And news are always supported by a certain party or a certain side. And, each news sometimes exaggerates a little bit to make it immediate so that you are not careless. And sometimes they under sell it because they are serving to try to calm the community. However, in all that noise, which I'll call noise, it's for me, the majority of it is noise, there's a set of information within it that says, you know what, there might be some truth here. And so if I'm able then to look at all the news that are coming in, overlay it with the other 5 domains, I start coming to a reality that this is the truth. The last one is enactment. And this is a critical and a very powerful real-time sense-making venue for I think most practitioners. And a good example right now is during the COVID-19 outbreak. What happened with the people that didn't listen? So this is not looking at the situation in retrospect, which might seem like retrospect. This is almost like the immediate retrospect. Looking at the enactment, okay, so the people of China, when this went viral, what happened? Okay, what happened to the people that didn't listen? So what happened to Italy? What's going on in Mexico right now, and what are the consequences of some of the things that are happening? So looking at prior but recent historical events to learn how things that might have been just a few steps ahead of us, maybe just 2 or 3 weeks ahead of us, okay, as it spread and people listened or didn't listen, what were the consequences? So that's for me just a short-term retrospect. That's almost the immediate retrospect of maybe nothing, within 4 to 6 weeks of historical data that would allow us to understand, okay, so this has happened. People in, let's say, I'm using Italy, but there's many examples. They acted in a certain way, and these were the consequences of that. Other certain areas set up field hospitals, and when this started to expand, they were able to reduce the death rate by X amount. These are all enactments, and it is very critical that we react, we understand it, and very important that we learn from it. Just like we're looking at retrospectively, looking at prior viruses that happened years ago, historical. Enactment is looking at something historical, but in the immediate future, in the immediate past. And so, if we're able to overlay all of these domains together, all 7 of them, we're able to parse signal from noise. We'll be able to understand what weak signal detection looks like, and from that, we're able to do real-time sense making. Because we want to pivot at that inflection point that we talked about earlier, and be able to pivot, we need to understand what we're pivoting to, so that we don't go and turn all our stuff online, and then this goes away 3 weeks later, and then everyone's back to normal, and you spent a significant amount of investment effort into a domain that closes up really quickly. And so understanding real-time sense making, being able to parse signal from noise will allow us to understand how are we going to react to that inflection point. Are we, and from that inflection point, what are we going to do? So that's a little bit about real-time sense making. It's a very, I'm very passionate about it, and I could go into a lot more details into it, but this should give us a good understanding of what they are. So understanding that will allow us to respond and pivot accordingly, so that we are proactive, that when the crisis hits, we're prepared in a place that is more safe. So for the people that, right when this started to happen, they understood that this is going to cause us to stay at home. Many individuals that I know personally, Nigel Thurlow, I'm just gonna use him as an example. You know, when I was talking to him early on, before this ever became an epidemic, it was, you know, just a few cases in China. As in our conversation, he was tailoring a lot of these real-time sense-making conversations and was making sense of what this is going to do, and proactively started, you know, getting some essentials that he was going to need. Not like just in a panic mode, but more in a very proactive, thoughtful approach. That's critical because there are more things that are still going to happen, and we need to understand how we're pivoting in those situations. Are we going to be exacting? Are we going to be doing blue ocean strategies, or is this just going to go away? Now, in order to do that and be able to take that information from real-time sense making and to execute and do something with it, we need, as leaders, to be able to lead our organization in a certain way that is very proactive, very, I want to use the word inspiring. So a leader's only job is to inspire others. And so there's never been a more important time to move from a command and control to a distributed leadership model, especially in this remote environment, to an area where there's psychological ownership. So how do we trust our people and give them the psychological ownership so that they could be empowered to lead in their homes, in areas that we don't see them anymore, and be able to believe that the work that they're doing is better off in their hands than with us doing command and control. So command and control is an outdated 70s concept. This is the opportunity to just kill it, and it should just rest in peace at this point. But we need psychological ownership. there are two aspects to psychological ownership, and in the book Turning the Ship Around, David talks about this concept around, in order to get psychological ownership, you need empowerment. And to create empowerment, you only need two things. You need to give them your people remotely the clarity that they need, and you need to give them the technical competency. Now, if you're doing exaptation and they're working remotely, they have the technical competency because you're repurposing what you're doing, that what they need more of you is communication around the clarity. In both of those, you could create empowerment, and empowerment is what creates psychological ownership. And to create psychological ownership and to truly empower your people, you just need a certain set of behaviors that are needed now more than ever. And if we could create and be a role model and a beacon of those behaviors, we'll be able to work remotely. We'll be able to exact or do blue ocean strategies in an area that everyone feels safe, in an area that everyone feels that they're productive. So just to list some of the ones that I feel are critical for this time in a remote environment. People are gathering all this information. They're doing real-time sense making. They're looking at those inflection points in all their products, and they're exploring the strategies. Is it blue ocean or exaptation that they're going down? And if we're going to empower our people, if we're going to be actually leveraging the direction for how are we going to repurpose and what are the new waters that we're going to be exploring, we need to listen. So active listening as a leader right now is really important. Listen to the words that are being said by your people, understand what they're saying, have humble inquiry, and I'll use the word empathy, because a lot of times the questions right now, people are schooling their kids at home. There's a lot of other factors that are happening, and so humble inquiry, this is the time to exercise that. Understanding separate realities and knowing from those separate realities, let me put myself in their shoes at home. What's going on in their household? Do they have the supplies that they need? Do they have the equipment that they need? Are they financially supporting other individuals that are losing their jobs? So understanding the separate realities as a leader is critical right now, because it could make or break the strategy that you choose to go down based on the weak signal detection that you've validated. Admit mistakes. As a leader, this is the time to be vulnerable and to tell your people that maybe you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know how the organization is going to grow. You're equally as worried about some of the issues that are happening in the organization, and you need their help. And admit that maybe you've done things that maybe aren't working, or that you don't even know how to do. So creating a shared mental model so that both your organization of your people as well as yourself share an aligned vision, an aligned need. I was talking to someone in the restaurant business who was really worried about laying off their people, and he started creating a shared mental model with the individuals that they're working with. He said, hey, you're not going to be coming in anymore right now because we're closed. Let's look at the menu. Let's learn from all the things the customer said. What are the new different things that we could adjust in our organization in this time? Because when we come back, we want to double our size. We want to expand 2 more stores. We want to explore these 2 blue ocean strategies. What other strategies do you think we should be exploring? And you might get some very, very interesting things when your staff knows of your struggle, you're vulnerable enough, you've admitted some of your mistakes, and you share a mental model with them. They might be the ones to pick you up at this time and be able to take you down to the blue ocean strategy, or give you ideas around what are the things that you could explore in blue ocean strategy, or what are the things that you could do to exact to certain needs, because they have a set of information that you don't as well. I'm not sure how many people out there actually, see, we've never been actually trained to work effectively as a team. A lot of times we're trained on effective task work, not teamwork. And so this is a time that, maybe teamwork training is heightened rather than stop training. Maybe we add additional training. people are at home, let's figure out different strategies of how we could work more effectively as a team. And how do we promote teamwork over task work? And the last one, be a leader in this time that actually participates. Roll up your sleeve, do the little things that need to be done, and be there for your teams. Check up on them, send emails, send phone calls, texts, check up on your people so that you can make sure that they're safe, as well as look at the things that need to be done and step in there and start doing some of them with them. Doing the little things that need to be done will speak volumes and will heighten the shared mental model that's happening. So these are a set of leadership behaviors that I think are key and vital as you understand the data that you've gathered, understand where you're pivoting to from those weak signal detections. And so psychological ownership, just to kind of as a call to action, is critical. From that, you get leadership, a set of leadership behaviors to role model. Those two together will allow you to lead in an area where you're psychologically safe. So psychological safety for me is a byproduct of those two, and not just those two, but also those two are going to be needed more now than ever for you to do to inflect upon as you look at that inflection point in all your products that you're offering and serving, so that you could be able to pivot from certain weak signal detections that you got from the real signals, not the noise. And as a byproduct of all this, with your teams, your outcome right now should just be around trust. So how do you measure trust? Because these weak signal detections are going to direct you in a certain way. Depending on what that inflection point is going to be for you, you're going to have to act in a certain way as a leader. And right now, everyone's working remotely. There's a heightened level of fear. And so the most important metric that organizations and individuals and practitioners should really be focusing on is how are they measuring trust. That's an outcome of everything that's going on. So with that, that kind of concludes my deck, Mike, and I'll hand it back to you.
Great, thanks.
There are also additional sources that I've cited throughout today. David Snowden, I still seem to never-ending learning journey with him. Phenomenal guy, and Cognitive Edge is producing a lot of new stuff that I'm extremely excited about coming out. David Marquardt, amazing book, Turn the Ship Around, and talks really about psychological ownership. Amy talks about the fearless organization, and most of the conversations that I've talked about today was a lot of my learnings from the flow system that was architected by John Turner, Nigel Thurlow, and Brian Ponch Rivera.
Great, thanks. Super presentation, really appreciate it. I've unmuted the phones if anyone has any comments or questions, and you can also chat by the chat function here. I see there's been some comments in here. Speak up if you've got questions or comments.
Mine in the comments here, but I guess it's hi Mohammed, this is James, by the way.
How are you, James?
Doing good. So you mentioned social and plausibility as two of the I guess I don't know the terms for them, I guess the categories of sense making. Could you elaborate more between the social and plausibility? Because it seems like when you mentioned the news as an example, I was a bit confused as to, it seems like news could be more social, especially now that we have more social media as opposed to back in the day we just had, the news. So yeah, just wanted to know more.
No, that's a great question. I appreciate the question. I did a little bit of research on the difference between those two, because initially I was like very much in the same boat as you. I was like, those kind of sound similar. However, what I've learned is that in the social in the social sense making vehicle, those are usually information that you're getting from trusted individuals. I won't use the word sources, but trusted individuals that aren't going to want to harm you in any kind of way. So it's almost that there's a different, it comes as a different source of information for you. And that level of information tends to be a little bit more trustworthy. So if my dad or mom tell me something, or my brother or my friend, my dear friends, or people that I really trust at work, I might be more intrigued to listen to them. However, the information that they've gotten came from a web of networks of informations that they gathered, and it might not be the truth, but it might be truthful from their perspective based on their bias. So it's kind of jaded a little bit by their bias, and so from that, they're giving you a set of information. So however, those individuals don't have I'll use the word, influential base behind them that's influencing what they say. They do care about you, and they really do want to give you a certain clear level of information, but what sounds truthful to them is off their bias and the different signals and noises that they've obtained. When it comes to the news, that's often, from a plausibility standpoint, that's usually off a propaganda or a story that is tailored for a certain individual need, based on if it's political movement, or if it's there might be a driving force that's causing them to say a certain thing to you. So you're from a trustworthiness perspective, it comes to you from a vehicle that's sourced from a body that could be corporate driven, it could be politically driven, it could be multiple different influencers that have caused that information to come out as a propaganda in the news.
Okay, that answers my question.
Yeah, so that's a little bit, that's how I've distinguished between the two. They both seem like social media kind of stuff, but they're actually not. One is social, as in trusted sources of people you know, and one is usually influencely driven.
Awesome, cool.
Great, thanks. What I think I'm going to do is, if there's some questions that haven't been discussed, I'm going to put that into a format that Mohamed can respond to by email for people offline. And I put his slide there that shows his contact information there on the screen, so everyone has access to it. And what I'd like to do is just close this down and talk about next steps. This recording will be available. If you go to our website and you go to webinars, you can see where you can find the previous recordings, and this is going to be slotted in there. Anyone who participated today also gets a link to the recording, as well as other people that are on the distribution list that couldn't participate today. And next week, I've got a presentation presented. Brooks Carter, who's a person I've chatted on the phone, was connected through with a mutual friend, has written an article about reflecting upon George Washington and leadership. And he wants to talk a lot about positive psychology and also the practice of gratitude. So that's next Thursday, April 23rd. It's not on a Friday, it's going to be on Thursday. So that'll be available, and people can find out about that at that bit.ly link, 12 noon Central Time. We were going to hear from Jason Shoeless from the Generative Local Community Initiative with the focus of his work on other things. He needed to postpone that, so we will have that at a later date. I'm always got a couple things in the works as far as things I would like to continue to learn about myself personally, but also hear from other people and learn from them, similar to what we did today. So I've got some things in the works. Also, I'll just say about this, we've put together a podcast that business partner Max Brown is leading up, and he has some nice interviews here that you can also find on our website around a topic of purpose and principles. So you can find that on our website as well. So if you have a request for a topic you'd like to learn more about or talk about, or something you'd like to share with others, that is an opportunity for you to contact me and let me know. As I've said previously, during these critical times, when I shut the webinar down. If anyone wants to stay on the line and just chat a little bit, I'm happy to do that. I'll stay around as long as anyone is around, would like to do that, but knowing other people have other obligations. I want to thank Mohamed for doing this today, for taking the time and putting it together, and looking forward to continuing to learning with you on these topics as well. So thanks, Mohamed.
Very much appreciate it, Mike. This was, I still have a lot to learn myself, and I look forward to the journey with you.
Great. Okay, so hope everyone has a good day, a good weekend. Stay safe and stay sane. Thanks. Appreciate your time today, folks.
Thank you, everyone.